Good morning. This is Dan Clayton from Accountability Consulting, here to share with you today some thoughts on risk and control. My thoughts today are focused on those executives and board members that might be struggling to understand, one, not only what their role is related to enterprise risk management, but how they also go about choosing, defining, and making investment choices in risk and control activities across their enterprise. So I thought it would be helpful to share with you today my thoughts on how to organize that consideration. So first of all, the idea of risk and risk mitigation really dates back 4 or 5 decades, and it goes all the way back to the insurance industry and making a choice about whether or not to invest in an insurance product. That is very, very different than today's expectation of risk and control. Today, the average the average executive is expected to have a tool on their tool belt that allows them to make better decisions, to make better choices for the organization, and to be more successful because of, one, their understanding of risk and control as they are across the enterprise, and two, allowing that risk and control information to influence their decisions and their investment choices. So that's a big task. Enterprise risk management, all of the various resources and types of information that relate to risk and controls across the enterprise. How do you just take all of that and one, understand it, and then two, make decisions on it? If you're a board member and on an audit committee, how do you exercise oversight to say it's good enough? And if you're an executive, how do you spend money on it, or how do you know to spend money to fill in risk and control gaps for your organization? So my tips today focus on 3 areas of risk and control that are quite different, but helpful because they line up with the typical things that an executive will think about as they are trying to be successful and perform to expectations. So first of all, risk in 2009 was defined in ISO 31000 Risk Management, a publication that comes out of Europe. And they defined risk as the effect of uncertainty on business objectives. So that's good news because that puts the responsibility for risk and the choices around it right back in management's lap. Are you going to be successful as an enterprise? Understanding what would make you unsuccessful is risk assessment, and responding to that with action is control. So what does strategic, operational, or risk mitigating activities have to do with enterprise risk management, or that tool that's on the belt for the executive? And here's where I will kind of draw in some comparisons. So mostly an executive is thinking about performance management. I've got this many departments, these objectives, and we're all in the same vehicle moving towards this vision or this destination, this strategic destination over here. And that's what we're trying to do. Well, what risk and control says is that an executive today in this complex world needs more information, not less. And they can be more successful by borrowing more risk and control understanding from a variety of professionals and organizing that information and sending it up to decision makers at the right point in time. So what does that information look like? Well, when we first think about strategic risk and control, what that means is that we're making wise strategic choices. If we're not making wise strategic choices, we're exposing the organization to strategic risk. So when we take risk, strategic risk, are we borrowing from the best of decision science? Are we controlling that taking of risk by, one, having a formal process? Do we go about decision making with the same level of formality that we go about spending money elsewhere in our operations? Just as the CFO develops a list that says, these are the people that can spend this much, do we have a similar list that says these are the people that can decide this much, for the organization? That's a level of formality that helps to control strategic risk. Another one comes out of decision science. And decision science essentially is a 40-year-old profession that says that we're all human and we're all susceptible to mistakes. And those mistakes typically can be organized into 8 to 10 different cognitive biases. In other words, one example is because we're the decision maker, we must know the most to make the appropriate decision, which isn't always true. We need to borrow that information from the organization. So possibly within our formal strategic process, we have a list of potential biases and we check them as we go. So that's an example of strategic risk taking and controls that mitigate that risk taking. So when we think about operational risk and control, most of the regulation and leading practice advice out there talks about efficiency and effectiveness of processes. However, it's much more than that. And one area that we can look at that is starting to define operational risk and control more effectively is internal audit. And in internal audit, they talk about objective-based internal audit, which is assessing operational controls by first looking at the formality of oversight. So I have a particular department, it has some objectives, and how formally have those objectives been defined, communicated, disseminated down to all that supports it, and then how effectively are they measured? And then as time passes, are they formally ingrained or codified by policies and procedures? So a type of operational control for big, important operational areas. But we also have alignment and growth. So not just process efficiency and effectiveness, but we also have to have people with the skill to deliver and technology that enables that process. So when you put it all together, we have aligned operations. So that's a method of control, a way to stay successful at the operational level. However, that process that we have today is intended to grow into a complex process tomorrow and eventually into a system. And that growth helps to increase our capacity to deliver our products and services. And so what internal audit has said is that control for operations has to do with oversight and intentional or formal alignment and growth across our operations. And then finally, the last category is probably the most common and the most familiar. And to be honest, it's a little bit of an easy cop-out for executives because this is where we bring somebody in to do that for us. For example, compliance or risk mitigation is usually focused on an external risk. So we've got rules and regulations and regulators that we need to talk to. So we bring in a chief of compliance, and that person then does that for us, creates a program to manage that type of external risk. And that's worked quite well over the last 2 decades, but the future is talking about even integration at this level. Can we take all of these different professional perspectives, cyber risk, compliance, business continuity, human resources, legal, and really just use each of them to provide an angle of a perspective or a data point that could then help us better understand as executives and board members what the external threats are to our success. So basically, a good way to clear away some of the debris and and even the confusion that regulators and frameworks might cause for an executive is to look at risk and control as primarily a way to formalize and surface the good that management is doing to be successful, to borrow from decision science, internal audits, and other professionals out there, and then to organize risk and control information in a way that it can come back to the decision makers and they can make effective decisions. at the executive level or at the board oversight level. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.